Story number 1, The Midnight Stalker. It was a typical evening, and I found myself driving home alone after a long day at work. The drive is usually around 30 minutes, and today I happened to be exhausted, almost half asleep. The road stretched out before me, illuminated only by the little glow of my headlights. As I navigated the familiar twists and turns, something was off. It started with a shadow darting between the trees at the edge of the road. I brushed it off, thinking I was just being paranoid due to the tiredness, but the unease lingered. I turned up the radio, hoping that everything would be okay as usual. But no matter how loud I cranked the volume, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Not far into my road, I noticed something in the middle of the road. What should I do? I asked myself. Looking further, it was a chopped tree log, and my gut was trying to tell me something. And then I saw him, a figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the darkness. My heart pounded in my chest as I grasped the situation of a possible car hijacking, unsure of what to do. Should I slam the gas and make a U-turn, try driving around the tree? Before I could make a U-turn, the figure stepped out onto the road. His face was covered by a ski mask, but I could feel his eyes staring into me. I tried to swerve around him, but he moved with precision and speed, his hands trying to grab onto the hood of my car. Now his whole body was on top of my car, and he was banging the windshield. Panic flooded my veins as I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt as the car swerved to a halt. I saw him go limp and fall off the hood, hitting the ground. For a moment, everything was silent. The only sound was the pounding of my heart in my ears. I was wondering if he was still conscious or not. Suddenly, the man spoke, his voice in a deep, threatening tone. "Stop the car," he said, his words with anger. "Stop the car," he yelled. I didn't know what to do. Every instinct screamed at me to hit the pedal to the metal, to leave this sinister stranger behind in the darkness. But something held me rooted to the spot, a paralyzing fear that left me unable to move. I'm normally living a peaceful, calm life, so this was a different experience for me, and I wasn't sure how to handle it since it was like a life or death situation. And then he sprinted forward, smashing the car passenger window with a hammer. I screamed, the sound echoing through the empty night as I fought to keep him out. The man then puts his arm over the smashed window, reaching for the door handle. He was absolutely relentless, his fingers inching closer and closer to it with each passing second. And then, just as his hand closed around it, I decided to hit the gas, the car swerving forward with a burst of speed that sent the stranger stumbling backwards into the trees nearby. I didn't stop driving until I reached the safety of my home, my hands shaking as I reached for my house keys. My whole body was shaking, and I looked out the car windows to see if he had followed me. Then I sprinted towards my house. I locked the doors and drew the curtains, but even then I couldn't shake the feeling that he was out there, somewhere, waiting for his next victim. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I became paranoid, jumping at the slightest noise, constantly checking the locks on my doors and windows. Sleep became impossible, my nights filled with restless tossing and turning as I lay awake, listening for any sign of his approach. But despite my best efforts to protect myself, I couldn't escape the feeling that he was closing in on me, that every shadowy figure I passed on the street was him, watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then, one night, as I lay in bed, listening to the sound of my own breathing, I heard heavy banging by the front door, as if someone was trying to enter. My blood ran cold as I lay there, paralyzed with fear, knowing that he had found me at last. Luckily, there were no intruders that night. The next morning, I opened my front door and went inside my car to go to work. Suddenly, there was this red indicator which caught my attention. It was an indication of low air pressure. I got outside the car and noticed all 4 tires had been slashed. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the terror that gripped me. But I knew it was the end. The Midnight Stalker had finally caught up to me, and there was nowhere left to hide. Story number 2, The Cabin in the Woods. I grew up in a small town surrounded by dense forests. My family owned a cabin deep in the woods, a place we would retreat to during weekends for a break from the dread of everyday life. It was a quaint little cabin, surrounded by tall trees, with no neighbors for miles around. One summer night, I decided to spend the weekend alone at the cabin. My parents were away on a trip to Italy celebrating their 15th anniversary, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to enjoy some peace. As the night approached, I settled in, lighting a fire in the fireplace and absolutely loving the peace and quiet. What more could I ask for? This was perfect. I even had some Doritos and s'mores. But as the night wore on, I heard a faint tapping sound coming from outside the cabin. It was rhythmic, almost like someone was tapping their fingers against the window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Who could possibly be out there in the middle of nowhere? Since I don't have neighbors, this felt even more unsettling. With all my courage, I approached the window cautiously, peering out into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing but the swaying trees and the beautiful full moon through the branches. But then, I caught a glimpse of movement among the shadows. A figure emerged from the trees. It was a man, tall and slender, with long, scruffy hair that hung around his face. My blood ran cold as I realized he was staring right at me. I stumbled back from the window, shooken up. Who was this man, and what did he want from me? I considered calling the police, but the cabin was too remote for any signal to reach. I was completely on my own. As the night dragged on, the tapping continued, growing louder and more frequent with each passing minute. I huddled in the corner of the cabin, clutching a kitchen knife for protection, but I knew deep down that it would be no match for whatever was out there. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, the tapping ceased. I waited for what felt like an eternity, listening for any sign of movement outside. When I was sure the coast was clear, I gathered my things and fled the cabin, never looking back. To this day, I still don't know who or what was lurking in the woods that night. But one thing is for certain, I'll never be able to shake the feeling of being watched, even in the safety of my own home. Story number 3, Broken Memories. I tend to explore abandoned places for the thrill and curiosity of it. So when I heard about an old house a few miles away that had been forgotten for years, I knew what I was getting myself into next. In the past, I've gone down the sewers, near Area 51, caves, and lots of crazy places in general. Seeing a house that had been left untouched with some history and a glimpse of someone's life is something I find fascinating. As I approached the crumbling structure, I noticed the decaying walls and broken windows. Graffiti covered nearly every inch of the exterior. Since there was vandalism, I had to be wary of my surroundings since I might not be alone as I had anticipated. Pushing open the creaking door, which was unlocked, I stepped inside where it was dark. My flashlight flickered, revealing the dust-covered furniture and peeling wallpaper in the living room. There was a couch I could rest on. It seemed pretty bad in shape, so I probably shouldn't touch it. There was also a bulky, old-fashioned TV. I made my way through the house, each room reminding me of a forgotten past. Old photographs littered the floor, their faces long since faded with time. It was mostly family pics from the 1950s in black and white. The air was heavy with the scent of decay, but I pressed on, since that was nothing out of the ordinary. There was also lots of trash on the floor, and all the furniture looked like it had survived an earthquake due to how displaced it all was. I opened the fridge, and there's this black substance over it. I start gagging, since it smelled a lot like decomposition and vomit. As I went up the stairs to the second floor, the wood creaked beneath my weight. The air grew colder, which added unease, but I pushed it aside and continued my exploration. For the second floor, I went into a room and found it full of creepy dolls. Lifeless dark eyes, pale skin, strange clothes, realistic hair. It was like they were all staring at me. Imagine trying to sleep there. I always hated dolls, so I got out of that room almost immediately. Makes me shake a little just thinking about it. It was then that I decided to go upstairs towards the attic. The air grew colder than before. The atmosphere was rapidly changing, and I could tell it wasn't going to be any good. What I saw was daunting. A blanket littered with empty bags of chips and ramens. It's almost as if someone had been occupying this area recently. I looked over the corner and saw an elderly man with a brown jacket standing there menacingly. He screamed, and I immediately bolted off down the stairs. He chased after me with a baseball bat, screaming nonstop like a wild animal, and the footsteps grew louder and louder. I fell down the stairs but felt nothing due to adrenaline. Fortunately, I outpaced him and busted the front door open, making an escape. As soon as I got back home, my ankle had a sharp pain which set in shortly after, and it was limp. Needless to say, I wasn't going to explore places anytime soon.
Story number 4, Lurker. I had taken on a night shift at the local diner to save up for college expenses. I planned on going to law school in the future, so tuition prices were no joke. My family had planned a trip to visit relatives out of town. They encouraged me to come, since my relatives were so eager to see me. but I declined, opting to work instead. The thought of having the house to myself for the night seemed like a break from everyone and everything. I wasn't really a people person, so whenever I had to socialize, my batteries for the day were dead. By 4 a.m., I had cleaned the tables, which had barbecue sauce and grains of rice everywhere. As I closed up the diner and made my way home in the late hours of the night, the streets were deserted, and my only light source was flickering streetlights. With no cars passing by, it made me think of Silent Hill because of hindered vision and the feeling of isolation, not knowing if the unknown was after you. To my right, there was an alleyway. In front of it, there was a hooded man, hands in his pockets, back leaning against a wall. He was whistling a tune. As I walked past him, trying to keep my distance, he started walking right behind me, his steps becoming deliberately louder a minute after. He started whistling progressively faster, as he slowly went from a casual walk to a full sprint. My heart rate started going faster. I looked behind my shoulder for a second while running. I was so focused on the man that I tripped on a rock, and by that time it was too late. He grabbed my arms from behind, held my head against a brick wall. He was laughing hysterically and threatened to smash my head with his fist. If he were to do that, I could get a concussion, or even worse, death. When all I was trying to do was make a living and survive, I felt powerless. Nothing but powerless, but I wasn't going to let this incel get the best of me. I was able to loosen his grip with my arms, and I elbowed him to the nuts, making him grunt. Now this was my time to escape. As soon as I got home, I fumbled for my keys, heart pounding in my chest as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Panic surged through me as I slammed the door shut and bolted it behind me. I looked through the curtain, and there it was, the hooded figure standing there like a statue on the side of the road. I closed the curtain and checked a minute later. He was gone, or so I thought. I looked through my door's peephole and caught a glimpse of something moving, a pair of eyes staring directly to it. I fell down in shock and crept through the house, checking every window and door to ensure they were securely locked. But no matter how tightly I secured the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. With trembling hands, I reached for the phone, my fingers slipping against the smooth screen in my struggle to dial 911. It wasn't until 15 minutes later when the police arrived, sirens and red blue lights flashing everywhere. There were around 4 cars in total. They should have come sooner, I thought in frustration. They checked in with me and weren't able to find the suspect, unfortunately. Needless to say, my family is happy that I'm still here in one piece, but I still have nightmares from this. I'm not sure if I'll ever recover. Me and my family ended up moving to another neighborhood not long after. Story number 5, Not Alone. It was a sunny, slightly windy day, and I was an avid camper. Today seemed like the perfect time to go camping, so I did. I parked my van at a nearby local park, so I wouldn't have to pay for parking in the forest. On my way to the forest, I carried my luggage, which consisted of a tent, flashlight, knife, compass, canned beans, water, and a camping stove. As I entered the deep woods, I saw a shredded camping tent that seemed like it had been laying there for quite some time. Must have been a bear or some wild animal, I thought to myself. The sight was creepy as hell at first, but I played it off thinking whatever it was must be gone by this point. As I walked further into the dense woods, I found just the right spot. From there, I set up my small green tent and made dinner. The fire was ignited under the stove, and I put in the canned beans, broke it into chunks with a plastic spoon, added some spices, and got my flour tortillas. Needless to say, this hit just the spot, and I was left disappointed, craving more. As the sunset slowly but surely started fading away, the trees became darker and darker with everything else hidden in sight. It was then when I heard leaves crunching. Someone was walking past my campsite, and I was getting a bad vibe from them, not sure why. Could it be the idea of thinking I would be alone on this fateful night only to not be? Or stranger danger, not knowing someone else's intentions and humans being generally perceived as the real monsters? It's like my gut is trying to tell me something, which is often a red flag. And in this case, I should probably leave. However, it might just be someone walking and going on about their day. So it's not like they're being hostile or anything. I decided to stay and hoped the rest of the night would go down smoothly. I laid down inside my tent with the light above my head. It was then when things started to get creepy. I hear footsteps and leaves crunching near my tent. I turned off the light and stopped moving entirely, trying to think of what to do. The footsteps only got louder and louder, which was my worst nightmare. I called out to the stranger in a normal tone, saying hello numerous times, but the footsteps continued with no response back. The stranger started touching my tent and I started yelling, "I have a knife! I have a knife! Back away! I don't want to hurt you!" I unzipped the tent and grabbed my flashlight. The stranger is now walking away. Maybe this would be the end of it, but no. The stranger just stood there, and stood there some more. My gut feeling was getting worse, and I wasn't sure if I should fight or flight. I left the tent shortly after, and the stranger started approaching me in a normally paced walk. I yelled, "I see you, back away! I have a knife!" The stranger starts sprinting toward me, and not knowing if this sadistic individual was armed, I decided to run. I ran, leaving all my other supplies behind, and the footsteps kept getting deliberately louder. I saw a flashlight behind me in the distance, and was almost out of breath. After 5 minutes of endlessly running in a random direction, I wasn't sure where in the forest I was at. It seems like I lost the stranger, but now for my main goal, which is leaving the forest and getting into my car. I waited for the sunlight to return and walked back to the trail where the chase happened. I found my tent ripped to shreds and all my belongings were about gone. Glad to say I wasn't injured and got back home. But sadly, I'm not sure if I'll ever go camping after this. I love peace and quiet, but this was something different. Anyways, thanks for watching, and if you made it to the end, please consider dropping a like and subbing to support this freshly baked channel. If you're interested in submitting your very own horror story, submit it to the Gmail account below, and again, thank you for watching and enjoying my content as it was intended. I hope to upload again soon, so don't forget to hit the bell.